All right. This is Words of the Encryption Convict. This is Change, Part 1, Pool. I have two of my favorite items in my cell. A cheap, old, dollar store, 5-tube change collector that I've had for ages. Super juvenile and petty, but filling it and thinking of the smallest amount of things I buy when cashed in is an easy high. The other item I have is a blue Fiesta ware coffee cup from my first marriage. Besides arcane music and art, is the closest tangible thing I have to nostalgia. Nothing sentimental about it, I just have a soft spot for the durability and unique colors of the old cup. Why am I saying this? I'm currently behind bars, trapped. Nothing around me differs from month to year to second to minute. So I think about stories of my friends and their raw experiences of them fighting the flow of time. I'm at the dawn of a long sentence in a jail for various crimes of encryption. There are worse crimes every day, but that is besides the point. I'm here alone and meditating on time, decay, and the terrible ordeals that have happened in the past. So I have 3 stories to tell. The first story is about a friend I will call R. R was younger than me and had fits of confused inspiration. He was usually morose or under the spell of emotions that capped off very quickly, normally in a quiet, boiling anger. A unique character indeed. It was a hot, still summer evening when R called me frantically to follow him to his, quote, pool of unchange. I was done with my daily jobs, or done enough with him to see this with him, though I was slightly uncharmed and mildly annoyed. Putting my work away for the night and clearing my mind, I left my house. We met at the entrance of an elementary school closed for the summer. It was close to my house, so I walked on the sticky, quiet summer night in silence to the lonely meeting spot. It was a nice precursor to what was coming. R was ready for me and had an uneasy energy about him. His car was parked and he assured me that it would be a semi-quick trip. We headed briskly into the thick woods that engulfed the school. No one was around and it seemed like no one ever would be. R walked ahead of me and said, "You know that weird sculpture outside of Ann Arbor that everyone is always yammering on about?" "Yeah, I know of it, but I've never seen it. People are always getting chased away. Some say it's a UFO." "Well, this pool is like that, but way more involved, organic. I don't think you will agree with it, but you have to see me experience it." I said, "Ha, I'm ready for it. It's new." I was quietly very gullible. When I was a young gun, I thought the drummer to rock me like a hurricane were from huge hollow drumsticks, not the backwards drums they were in reality. It suddenly felt really late, and the walk was beginning to get more silent and the bushes were closing in. The bugs around my head and arms only added to the growing annoyance. We continued on small talk and finally R stops. We have arrived. Sure enough, in the middle of the brush, forced in the middle of a nondescript forest debris, was a gutted out pool, about the size of the ones you see in community apartment zones to lure people in, but are rarely used except for weirdos with nothing to do and go there as a ritual. Silently, I walked around it while R crouched down and rubbed his hands slowly. It was an odd shape for an object forced in the middle of the woods. It was filled with layers of rich, dark wooden fibers. Looking in even closer under the fibers, there was a pale bluish light pulsating with a dull throb, as if asleep or keeping energy for a time when it needed to jump up alive. I leaned over and touched the layers of wood. It was warm, like something was cooking within. Strange indeed. "Okay," said R, ready to pitch his crazy idea. I knew it was coming. "You know how I feel about time. I hate it. Why change? It only complicates things. Look at adults. Everything they do in their relationships just move on to more confusing and convoluted levels. Right here," as he dug his hands through the rich fiber, "is not the fountain of youth, but a conflict with decay, a way to trick your body to decay at different levels. Watch." I moved back a little and eased my stance. It was ridiculous, but at least uncommon. I had to learn to prepare myself for it, so watch. It's not pretty. R stood up and took out what looked like an oversized elementary school eraser out of his pockets and stiffened his neck and pulled it, making a very strange gesture, overextended and eerie. He started rubbing both sides of his neck over and over in an uneasy motion until he became red, puffy, and small slits began to emerge from both sides of his neck. When the slits became more open, R reached around to a small mound near the pool, apparently left errantly for the ritual, and dug his hands inside rapidly, pulling out a hidden stash of raw meat that looked like half-cooked poultry. Hard to tell in the lighting of the night, but the blue tint from the pool made everything more sinister, calculated, planned, and arcane. R took the raw, sliding meat and did more rubbing on his neck. His shirt started to get stained from the mess. The meat seemed to turn the slits into a green, moldish-looking material, absorbing somehow into the skin of his neck. I put my hands behind the back and felt the edge of my belt. After all this, which took about 20 minutes of me watching, R got on his knees and submerged his head into the dry pool. He stayed there for what seemed to be another 20 minutes, with only his feet moving back and forth to show he was still breathing. From my days of encryption abuse and the long horrors I had to watch on the victims, I knew when a body is under jeopardy of losing control, but this surely wasn't the case. After the long spell submerged in the rotten lumber, R lifts up and shakes his head, an emotion you see when someone comes out of a pool freshened and sharp. Standing up and shaken, R says buoyantly, "Oof! All right, let me explain. Decay was found to start from the neck down. The brain gets the ideas to change and wants to challenge the idea and shoots the messages via its energy synapses downward towards the rest of the body. This pool was made by our experimentalists, who you will see their grim outcome in part 2, and the chemicals tested and made in cold iron tubs until we got it right. Well, nearly right. So far it's been 2 months, and by freezing our necks and feeding in this cauterized meat, we have committed our bodies to fight off against decay. It's like cutting polarity humanly in half." I rubbed my foot on the ground. I had heard of the experiments in the moldy tubs from this electrics crew throughout the network of friends, and I was mildly shocked to see it here, albeit in a field with a raw witchcraft vibe done in a crude pool. "So who has done this the longest?" "Well, you know, name withheld, right?" "I haven't seen him in a while. A long while." "Yeah, it's not quite working out with him at all, and we are trying to find the right system to reverse the process. You know when you pinch your finger and the bottom gets blue and erupts?" "Yeah. Well, he's about 3 days from having below his neck explode from pressure. We were working fast. We were keeping him cold in that house we used for experiments, abandoned near the post street. All he can do is watch videotapes of old early rock pioneers and try to mimic the facial expressions to keep from going insane. And you know how you feel? And how do you feel right now after the neck slits and feeding them the moldy poultry?" "Well, it's strange. I feel my lower body is behind my head. I want both to be excluded from time. Our electrics crew is working on a pool that will do the same, but split the body in time half, from your left and right." "What if you switch it so your lower body changes and your head doesn't?" "Then you will end up like a voodoo shrunken head. It will eventually dry out and rot from the inside, like the pain of keeping a huge secret, which is what's slowly happening to name withheld. He tried something similar when he hated that he couldn't control how his body healed and did a bunch of experiments to himself with that. Because his body healed alone, he felt no harmony. You know, yeah, I know. I've seen the inside of his legs after that period. Really disgusting. Does this conflict affect your sense of time?" "Yes and no. Now there is no more conflict and things are healing in 2 separate ways. By this time his neck rubbings had swollen down, but his lower body was moving in ways that didn't seem easy, like a mind of its own and 4 different conflicting ideas. A rush of humidity came over the sinister scene, and it was really time to go. Well, this has been quite a bit to swallow. I need to sit on this." "Just wait. Symmetrical decay will not be part of our close network physically soon. There's been some really bad experiments in the electrics, but mine is only having a small setback. Alright, let's head back. We walked back in silence with only spurts of small talk. The walk home now was late, and the streets were even more still, and the feeling of no one being around seemed to be cut in half. R had a point about the pool, but not typing this in my cell and seeing my sterile environment and age, especially with the other inmates, I can see his fear of decay, but I do not subscribe with his crew and his electrics and their grotesque local experiments. On to the second story. Part 2, 3 phases in saliva. This is the worst episode of people failing at a non-decaying life. As stated before, this has to do with R's friends, the experimentalists who go through phases of deep trial and errors into trying to fight against time and decay. This is an earlier example of the pool episode, a trial that wasn't able to happen again, as you will see. Okay, I was called again by R's team, who we will call the Electrics. It was an uncommon night of summer rain, and I got a message to meet the team at an old empty house they were holding court at for me to see the new experiment in action. It was a Wednesday night, one of those middle-of-the-week feelings where if something good happens, you have the good momentum to coast into a powerful, eventful weekend. I was hoping for that, needed it from the doldrums of an already long start to the week. So I parked my car by an empty house and see the team of the Electrics, 5 of them in rubber industrial strength utility suits. They're bustling about, very excited. One of them grabs me and leads me to a room with a lone chair positioned carefully where I can see their stunt in action that they planned for me to witness. I plant myself down and the area is suddenly quiet by rain and the occasional speeding cars on the nearly empty street. I see from where they position me, my eyeline view is directly at the top of a utility pole. The team scaled up the old, craggly, wet wooden pole and is now carefully loosening and cutting off the stinger leg of a 480-volt copper transformer tin. As I stated before in the pool situation, from my deep encryption days flirting with that type of arrangements, I am numb to seeing humans in danger, and I wasn't startled or tense from the insane maneuver they were getting ready to do in some arcane parkway style late into the rainy night. The team had 2 ladders set up from the transformer tin and were finished cutting the live line. I then realized what they were attempting. They arranged themselves in a series connection of the transformer tin into a black tub of fluid to get a buck bounce charge in reverse into the liquid, sending roughly 5,000 wild volts into each of the members. I sat up and looked. This was going to be wild. Within seconds, I heard a confident rustling sound of the lead team member giving the go-ahead when they connected arms, and within a split millisecond, the entire block was filled with a burying light, nearly like a nuclear blast. The air turned rancid and my senses were gone for a good minute, and all I could do was shield my eyes for protection. As the light went down and the heat subdued, I turned my head down to the ground and watched the team illuminated and shaking in movements that were grotesque as they were bizarre. Too fast for life and too slow for time around them. They appeared to be in agony and exhilaration simultaneously. Then as soon as it went into life, the dim rain faded the members and they seemed to sink into the grass, vanishing. I was shocked, speechless, alone in the empty gray house. Not knowing what to do and not wanting to be a part of the project, I ran out and sat in my car, hands on my keys. After what seemed about a year, I drove home unsteadily and walked back to my garage. A note was left for me, carefully placed in the center of my workbench I used for spray painting. I eyed it carefully and picked it up. It was from the Team Electric's leader. Dear John, if you are reading this, I can only conclude our team failed, but not on all counts. You saw what can only be described as the Electrics being burnt into a new reality against decay and time. After the 5,000 volt blast, we lived in real time. No future, no present, no past. We were blasted into an eternity within that period. You were the only one that saw it. R will now show you another attempt with a pool and liquid we built later on. Do not tell anyone. No one knows you saw it. No going back or forward. I put the paper down, stood in the garage for the remainder of an hour, deep in non-centered thought. Folded the paper 3 times and went back into my house, confused and shaking my head at the team and their utter denial of time. Now 5 members less. Part 3. Frozen, difficult faces don't decay. Here's the final part of the trilogy. Somewhere deep in my subconscious, wriggling away, is a memory of a visit that I shared with friends that we don't talk about because of its dreamlike quality. Here it is. An offer for me and 3 friends to visit a famous actor in the hills in an obscure and faraway town in Southern California. It was a low-tech deal and done easily without much hassle. Myself and my 3 fellow travelers were loaded into the hotel, each taking a good portion of the afternoon left alone in our rooms. And as the day eased away, we were finally ready to meet the famous actor. We walked to the nearby mobile studio that was surprisingly sparse, with a clean, empty Spartan set and a handful of workers handling the tech and cameras in a manner so comfortable it was shocking in their non-effort. As we came up, our host greeted us heartily and took us to watch a few scenes and said that we could go back and meet us for a late dinner. We stood in the shadows of the set, but couldn't really make much out of the movie as it was a collection of short takes, seemingly a cleanup for what looked like an average movie about a relationship gone away. Our party slowly sulked away and relaxed back at the hotel, enjoying the fresh night and the exotic scenery for a stretch, until our host came back, oddly excited. Well, I'm excited to show you some stuff back in my room. It's very strange. After a brief meal and a handful of cocktails, we followed him back into his room. A quick card swipe and we were inside a very messy room, looking like someone wanting to make a home on the fly. We went ahead and arranged a circle of chairs around an old TV and a VHS desk. I knew our actor host the most, so I positioned myself for the brunt of the handling of what we were about to see. The actor's excitement was running through to us. Okay. As you saw, our movie set is very minimal, and this project is running very easily. So, I and some crew members have tuned into this, I'll call it early rock and roll popular culture discipline here in town. Let me explain. One of our crew members knew some older people in town, and they are crazy about pre-early rock, like pre-war primitive thing around here. I'm not wild about the music, and you know I play piano, but after talking to the people in town, we gave it a go, and it totally worked out in a strange way. Quickly, the actor showed us a picture of the leader of this facial scatter local music culture. It gave me a quick pang of disgust because he looked just like this creep at the gym I work out with back home. He's this lurker guy that always tells everyone horrible sexist and racist jokes and about how he's almost done with his 700 sit-ups. He almost always gives unnerving attention to young frat boy types and follows them around with the horror jokes and how he hates that they are making the gym co-ed until they give him a look to go away. One time, I saw him corner a young athletic type and told him how he got really drunk once by scooping the urine out of the stall in the changing room at the gym and putting it in his dialysis machine. I sat on the arm press and watched out of the corner of my eye as the kid shrunk and turned white. He was an ex-high school music teacher and would always comment on the light rock pumped through the gym sound system. Hit me with your best shot. What does that mean? I mean, is that meant for Woman's Day? He said to no one. He was a living nightmare, and I saw him nearly 4 days a week. We leaned in for more of the story and was shocked. His absorption into it was magnetic. Okay, when we agreed to start, the locals said we had to study 2 things that could not by any means become separate from the tradition, and the rest was up for us to express ourselves. 3 of the leaders of this town gave us a pile of old unlabeled VHS tapes of just frozen facial expressions. Really strange, and hours of it. A kind of collection of a mix of emotions that said volumes. You rarely see them. They have to be frozen in action and then transported on stage to you in a small town. It said each of us has to master a handful of these expressions and use them artistically in performance. And the second thing is, the band has to have the quietest, dampened sound from their instruments so that the din of the locals overrides the sounds. The screams of the audience are the music, and your muted acoustic instruments, early rock and roll style, i.e. drums, stand-up bass, piano, etc., is pointless. But you have the freedom to bang out whatever. The more untogether, scattered, abstract the music is, the more the audience will go crazed, but it cannot be the focus. There you will find your expression. This is the local style. Silence from us for nearly 2 minutes. I was the first to speak. So have you done any shows? Nearly 20. One is tonight for you to see. I can't wait to show you. It's beyond difficult and uneasy. Can we see some of the expressions? One of my friends asked. God, no. Only on stage with our quiet instruments. The hardest part was to capture the expressions and bang out nonsense for hours. It never has a beginning or end, and you can't change it. It's better and harder than acting because you are a puppet to these twisted facial expressions that drive these people nuts. The actor looked at his watch. It's nearly time. I need to warm up and to be alone for a stretch. I'll meet you there. He became more internal in his manner and walked us out. It was apparent the show was difficult and a challenge to him. We wrapped up our hotel room visit and walked over a long way to the Union Hall style place across town. It was easy to find as more locals led the way as we got closer and the noise picked up. It was very late now. The reality that we were in a very remote place doing a sacred thing was claustrophobic and addictive at the same time. To talk about the show and what went on in the Union Hall is nearly impossible to describe, especially in this time-frozen walls of my cell. Sometimes I try to hold an uncanny expression all day in my prison, but no one notices. And even sometimes I put a tinfoil carefully into the lone power outlet of my room, but never have the courage or blind determination of the electrics. After all, as much as I try, I can't change my encryption crimes.